never changes. Following the Allied victory in the Second World War, an era of Cold War emerged between nuclear-armed capitalist and communist superpowers who maintained and expanded their influence through proxy wars and puppet regimes, allowing them to steal resources from poorer nations, using any means necessary to secure their economic, political, and military interests. Though there was a strong need for oil and more traditional energy sources, many invested in nuclear power, making great technological strides in compact nuclear fusion generators and miniaturized nuclear fission, as well as massive supercomputers, advanced robotics, artificial intelligence, cybernetics, power armor, laser weapons, and genetic engineering. As populations grew and resources like fossil fuels and uranium dwindled throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, the world's larger factions acted increasingly aggressive, leading to the resource wars and a growing fear of nuclear apocalypse. Recognizing the severity of this threat, the American government collaborated with Vault-Tec Industries on Project Safehouse, starting isolation experiments in 2040 so that by 2054, they were ready to build 122 underground vaults under the pretense of providing fallout shelters for segments of the population in case of nuclear war. However, in working with the Enclave, a conspiracy of deep state government officials, these shelters had a larger, secret mission, with only 17 vaults designed to act normally as controls, while the other 105 were divided between some of the largest corporations in America, giving them direct control over the future of humanity, allowing them to conduct whatever social, physical, or psychological experiment they desired, implementing sometimes cruel, violent, or extreme conditions to see what succeeded and what failed, thereby finding the best way to rebuild civilization under their leadership. The Enclave, meanwhile, had its own goals, planning to gather the data from these vaults and use it to either conquer the wasteland or possibly leave Earth on a generational starship. The world's energy crisis then worsened in 2066 when the United States stopped all oil exports, leaving China so desperate they invaded Alaska to secure some of the world's last oil fields, beginning the Sino-American War, the first ever direct confrontation between nuclear-armed superpowers. Tipping the scales of battle toward America, their military produced T-45D power armor in 2067, suits of metal providing individual soldiers enormous protection and the strength to carry heavy weaponry. In time, these suits were upgraded further, creating the T-51 and T-60 series. This enormous technological advantage allowed the United States to invade mainland China and secure Alaska so that by 2077 the government in Beijing was on the brink of collapse. Despite their approaching victory in the Sino-American War, the United States had many problems at home, with the new plague killing thousands in 2053, causing the government to close their borders and impose a national quarantine. 2 years later, in 2055, the Westeros Corporation ordered their California research facility to start working on a cure, and while they ultimately failed, their work was repurposed in 2073 toward the Pan-Immunity Virion Project, aiming to protect the population from biological attack. Conducting tests in other locations across America, including Huntersville, Appalachia, their research into altering the DNA of living beings made significant progress so that by 2076, the US government sent the military to secure and oversee the project, renamed the Forced Evolutionary Virus. Under the command of Colonel Robert Spindle, aided by his second-in-command Captain Roger Maxson, a military contingent was sent to the Westeros research facility until 2077, when they and all FEV research moved to the Mariposa military base. But everything fell apart on October 10th, when their soldiers learned about the monstrous human experiments conducted by FEV researchers. Outraged by this revelation, all discipline broke down, and the soldiers were in chaos, finding no answers or aid from their commander Robert Spindle, who had a nervous breakdown and locked himself in his office. It therefore fell to Captain Roger Maxson to restore order, arresting, interrogating, and ultimately executing every scientist, at first refusing to believe their work was sanctioned by the government, until eventually convinced by their corroborating stories. As Colonel Spindle refused to cooperate, Maxson and his men broke down the door just in time to see their commander apologize and take his own life. Rising to face this incredible challenge, Maxson took charge and sent out a message of rebellion, severing ties with the United States government. Shocked to receive no response, Maxson feared what might come and so ordered his men and their families to take shelter in the facility. These preparations proved wise, as on October 23, 2077, the Great War began and ended in a matter of hours, when the nations of the world launched their nuclear weapons, resulting in the destruction of human civilization and the death of billions. Surviving the initial devastation, Roger Maxson led his soldiers and their families to a government bunker in the Lost Hills of Southern California, and while the men were protected by power armor, their families were not, losing many to raiders roaming the region. Killing twice the number they lost, the fallen included Roger Maxson's wife, though his young son survived. At some point in the journey, Sergeant Dennis Allen disobeyed orders and led a faction to break off from the others, so they might scavenge the West Tech research facility, now called the Glow, where most lost their lives to the security system, while survivors perished soon after. Arriving at the Lost Hills, Maxson saw the chaos and devastation around them, but only grew more determined to keep his men together, spending the next few years crafting an ideology and philosophy to inspire and give them hope, offering a structure by which they might live honorable, productive lives. He also sought to make this faction entirely independent of any previous affiliations, thereby preventing surviving politicians from trying to exercise authority over these former American soldiers. Establishing a paramilitary faction under a new banner with the mission of defending their own and preserving pre-war civilization, Roger Maxson founded the Brotherhood of Steel, swearing in members with an oath of fraternity while providing a codex to explain their doctrine and responsibilities. Accepting both men and women into their ranks, the Brotherhood established a new hierarchy which grew more elaborate over time, beginning with the position of High Elder, granted to Roger Maxson as the supreme commander of all their forces. Underneath their leader, there were the Elders, who served on the advisory ruling council, or else led individual chapters of the Brotherhood. Next came the Paladins, who largely oversaw operations and training, but might also command units into battle. Then there were the Knights, focused primarily on combat and field operations, and Initiates as the lowest rank of the Brotherhood, young men and women under training, so they might eventually ascend to a higher position, depending on their specific talents. When their technology advanced to the point of reclaiming flight, they started the Lancers branch, training them as pilots for transportation and deadly air support. Aside from their military ranks, there was the civilian scribe branch of the Brotherhood, charged with research, keeping records, and improving upon existing technology. There were also some specialty ranks developed throughout the years, like Knight Errant, Officer of the Watch, Operations Officer, and the East Coast Sentinels, who bypassed the hierarchy to receive orders directly from an Elder. Expanding their influence across the wasteland, the Brotherhood was eventually joined by a National Guard unit stationed near the Mariposa base, but Roger Maxson had larger aspirations, using satellites to send out communications, seeking contact with any other surviving military units. Eventually, he reached Lieutenant Elizabeth Taggarty in Appalachia, a former comrade and friend of Maxson, who was initially skeptical of his vision for the Brotherhood, but soon joined, becoming leader of their Appalachian branch. Building up their forces in the east, Paladin Taggarty allied with the local Responders militia to defeat an army of super mutants in the Battle of Huntersville, after which they were congratulated by Roger Maxson, who announced the new long-term mission for the Brotherhood of Steel to one day restore civilization, specifically through the acquisition, utilization, and preservation of technology. After their victory in Huntersville, the Appalachian Brotherhood turned their attention to fighting back against the mutated humans and beasts suffering from the Scorched Plague. Enduring so many losses, Paladin Taggarty requested permission to use nuclear missiles, which was immediately dismissed by Maxson, who refused to ever consider the use of such weapons. When communication equipment broke down, cutting Appalachia off from the leadership in New California, Taggarty obeyed orders and continued the fight as best she could until 2095, when they were destroyed in their last stand at Fort Defiance. In 2103, Maxson sent the 1st Expeditionary Force, led by Layla Romani, to make contact with the Appalachian Branch, only to discover their eastern brethren were lost. Re-establishing the organization, Romani eventually found and destroyed an Enclave communicator, purposely cutting them off from contacting the leadership back west, believing they were a hindrance to her personal mission of helping regular people. But not all agreed with her decision, leading to conflict with her second-in-command, Daniel Shin, who remained loyal to the Lost Hills and their original mission. Thanks to the intervention of a hero from Vault 76, the question of leadership was finally decided in 2104. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Sir Jeremiah Ironside of House Comsia, Christ Walder the Crimson Shadow, Griffin Giant's Hammer, and Kurgan the Immortal. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.